Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping into a world that honestly feels like a grim, dark graphic novel come to life. We're going to explore a Gothic fable detailing the legend of the Hollow King, also known as the Last Thinker. We'll be looking into the terrifying lengths a ruler will go to just to control the unpredictable, messy nature of existence, and how the ultimate quest for absolute order inevitably becomes a trap.
Okay, let's dive into this by looking at the chilling opening monologue from our subject. The Hollow King announces himself with what's called the Cosmic Creed of Negation. He says, "I am the architect of the absolute I, the singular will that has finally outrun the shadow of the not I. True peace is the hollow silence of the one." Right out of the gate, we're dealing with a sovereign who doesn't just want to rule, He literally wants to erase everything that isn't him. He's actively trying to flatten a vibrant, pluralistic past into a singular narrative where his will is the absolute only force that exists.
Section 1. The Architect of Stasis. Fear of the Storm.
So to really understand this creed, we have to look at the archetype of the Last Thinker. Basically, he's a hyper-rational sovereign hiding his deep cosmic dread behind a crimson mask. This brings us to a fundamental philosophical dichotomy. On one side, you have the Dionysian reality. That's life as it actually is, chaotic, vibrant, totally uncontrollable, and full of multiplicity. Finding that way too heavy to endure, the Hollow King replaces it with the Apollonian illusion. This is a sterile, rigid, and artificially constructed order. He brands the vibrant, messy tapestry of the cosmos as chaos, just so he can sit in a massive, quiet cage of perfect stasis.
Section 2. Parables of the Void. The Four Cautionary Tales.
The Cosmic Creed actually contains 4 chilling mythic vignettes which perfectly illustrate the dangers of seeking a forced vacuum. The first is the parable of the giant stillness. Imagine a giant who expects to achieve supreme godhood by stepping into a perfect vacuum, essentially destroying every wind that buffets him and every earth that resists his step. But here's the catch. Without an external limit to push against, without that friction, he can no longer feel his own limbs. He just becomes a motionless heap in an empty room. It shows us that absolute power in a vacuum isn't sovereignty. It's literally the death of the self.
And this brilliantly illustrates our second story, the parable of the static bloom. A ruler looks at the chaotic, living wildflowers of his kingdom's groves and is repulsed. So he performs a systematic cultural castration. He replaces the living flora with smooth, painted stones, and because of this, the thriving bees vanish and the living soil turns to dead earth beneath his feet. He claims he captured eternal beauty in a perfect order, but in reality, he traded a vibrant ecosystem for a silent graveyard. Which brings us to a really terrifying question. What actually happens when a single truth erases all others? Well, we get our answer in the third story, the parable of the singular face. A monarch arrives in a marketplace full of 1,000 different masks and tongues. Terrified by this chaotic multiplicity, he forces every single citizen to wear a mask of his exact likeness. But by erasing all the other faces, he just becomes a prisoner of his own reflection, trapped in a silent, lightless cage of his own making.
Section 3. The mechanism of erasure, the demonized neighbor.
So how exactly does a ruler justify building this silent cage? It all comes down to the psychological tactics of the Hollow King, mapping perfectly to Nietzsche's concept of slave morality. Step 1. A weak will simply cannot endure the tension of a noble peer. Step 2. Instead of welcoming that struggle, the master negates his neighbor's humanity. Step 3. The neighbor is then branded a monstrous abomination. Why? To justify the master's actions. Which leads to Step 4. The master claims a good monopoly. This mechanism of erasing independent motion in others isn't a sign of strength, it's the ultimate symptom of cultural exhaustion. He destroys his equals because he's simply no longer strong enough to have them.
Section 4. Architecture of Inner Decay, the Fichtean Collapse. Now we reach the turning point of our fable. The Hollow King's illusions are finally confronted by entities known as the spirit siblings of truth, who arrive to absolutely tear down his fabricated reality with a fierce diatribe. They introduce a crucial philosophical concept, the not I. In Fichtean philosophy, the self, the I, can only know it exists by striving against an external limit, an other. So, the crucial point is that the king fundamentally misunderstood existence. By destroying the not I, by removing every boundary that resisted him, he destroyed the very friction required to measure his own motion.
The spirit siblings call this act exactly what it is: spiritual suicide. Shattering the boundary stones and flattening history into a single narrative doesn't make you a god. It's just a desperate attempt to freeze existence and remove all freedom.
It leaves the sovereign ruling over a silence that has absolutely no context. Section 5. The Lightless Cage, the Ultimate Trap of the Void. We finally map out the grim final fate of the Architect of Stasis as the Spirit siblings deliver this devastating commentary. You look upon your perfect order and see a temple, but we see a shroud designed to hide a hollow soul. The king's grand architectural order was never about majesty or strength. It was completely a historical fabrication born of deep, paralyzing insecurity. To summarize this final diatribe, it paints a truly tragic picture. The Hollow King is nothing more than a puppet, dancing on the strings of his own insecurity. He traded the vibrant Dionysian tapestry of life for a sterile mask because he completely lacks the noble strength required to lead a world of multiplicity. He chose to be a jailer of shadows, terrified of competition. And now he sits alone, ruling a vacuum where his power has no meaning because it faces no resistance. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. The Hollow King's fable is extreme for sure, but it holds a mirror right up to our own lives. When things get chaotic, it's so tempting to want to exert absolute control, to silence dissenting voices and just smooth out the messy edges of reality. But as we've seen, that friction is actually required to know who we are. So ask yourself, are you sacrificing the vibrant, messy friction of life for the false safety of a sterile cage? Don't be afraid of the storm. Embrace the chaos, welcome the struggle, and let the messy multiplicity of existence keep you alive. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.